Welcome to the Perspectives Podcast. This is Josue. As you guys probably already know, I'm a fellow believer, fellow Christian from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I do not like long walks on the beach like Chase, and that's okay. Attended the Oral Roberts University, and the person that's laughing right now is none other than Chase Brown himself. He enjoys long walks on the beach. I'm not really sure what that means. No, until it sticks, we'll keep going with it. He attended the University of North Texas. Let me get this right. And he's a philanthropic, is that how you say it?
Yeah, philanthropic.
An aspiring philanthropic creative.
Yeah.
We're still figuring out what that means, but it sounds great, and we're going to put that on his resume. How you doing, man?
Dog, doing good.
Yeah.
It's a good Sunday. Yeah, man. Like football season is here.
Yeah, that's true.
And just really ready to continue to just kind of see what's going to happen over the rest of this year.
Yeah, I hear you. And for those of you guys that are probably curious and you've been keeping up with us, welcome to the 50th episode. Man, we made it. Let's get the round of applause.
Yeah.
This is us clearly clapping for ourselves. And we know that you guys are cheering us on as well. So thank you for that. We can hear all the way from here. Man, we made it.
For real, man. It's crazy. It's crazy to think it's already been a year. Like legit.
Geez.
And that this is our 1 year celebration of, the podcast and everything that's going on. And it's man, it's just really difficult to believe. Granted, whenever you've been locked up in the house for 7 months, time flies by. But just to think that, it was a year ago today that we went live with our first 3 episodes. And, like for me, I had just come back from New York with the family. It was the day before my 26th birthday and was getting ready to go out to Atlanta with Kirby and some of those friends to meet with some of the people out there for some of those projects. And, here we are, October 22nd, 2020.
Yeah.
Exactly a year later. And we've made it, man. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, you think about just 2020 and the last year, everything that went on with COVID and these hornets that almost killed us and all these different things that just we had to deal with. Now we're here, and 2020 is almost done. I have suspicion 2021 is going to be very interesting. Okay. That's all I'm going to say for right now. I'll discuss it in our podcast in December, so you guys have to come back for that. But what were we talking about on today's podcast?
Yeah, man, it's going to be a really good time, I think, for you and I and for our listeners, just a time of enjoyment and really just a time to kind of recap and share some of the lessons, some of the wisdom that we've gained, through this experience of hosting the podcast, through our guests, and just through everything around that comes with creating something like this. Yeah. And so kind of for that, we don't necessarily have anything new in this episode. We don't have a guest randomly appearing. Right. No one's gonna surprisingly appearing, anything like that. But just kind of look back over this past year, which I think is good. And for me, I'll say is something that I have a tendency to kind of forget to do. Yeah, is kind of reflect and look back and just see what the Father has done over that time, and rather than just kind of continue just to work, like be able to sit and rest and in the work that He's doing, and the finished work that He's done. Yeah, and so kind of start this out. We thought it would be fun and positive and everything like that to kind of just start this out with reminiscing on some of our best or some of our favorite, times, moments, memories, of the podcast over the last year, and whether that's a guest, whether it was something outside of the podcast but still kind of related, right? Something like that. So why don't you kind of kick it off with one of yours? Man, I mean,
there's so many stories, and before I even go anywhere, shout out to everybody that came on the Perspectives podcast. Yeah, came and you shared your time, your energy, your life, and all these great stories. We're here because of you guys. Yep. So I want to personally thank you. I don't know if Chase is going to thank you guys, but I'm going to do it. And I want to thank all the listeners. I mean, that's just crazy. I would have never imagined. I still remember having conversations with Chase about this. I'm like, man, I don't know about this podcast. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if anybody's going to listen. And then now, Chase could probably share some of those things. But, man, some of my favorite memories, I still remember some of the stories that Pastor Josh LaBelle shared about his time in Nepal.
Oh, dang.
I mean, one of them was just, I was so crazy. I remember having a conversation with Isaac down in Brazil. And man, that was probably one of my favorite stories that I heard, just testimonies that he shared last year about how God came through in that classroom. I remember the series that we did during COVID and just all the different people that we wanted to bring on and speak to them about different issues.
Yeah, because for that, like, we didn't even know what the heck we were going to do when everything got shut down. We were like, well, since we normally talk about, travel missions, culture, something like that, we're just kind of like, okay, a lot of that's been removed. And so seeing how God was able to work that in, it's crazy.
And even just trying to figure out, like, I mean, all the laughs that we've had on the podcast, right? I mean, just saying a whole bunch of crazy things and people listen to it. But one thing that is very memorable. So if you guys run into Chase and I, or if you want to just message us, on social media, all the feedback.
Yeah,
man, the feedbacks is always very memorable. I have people like, man, I was listening to you guys and it made me think about this, or it challenged me here, or like, to me, that's always surprising. Even though I know people listen, I'm always shocked when people bring it up. Right? Because I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. I don't like listening to my own voice. So whenever people are like listening and talking and saying all these different things, for me, it's always very shocking. So I might come back to some other things, but what were some of the things that kind of stood out to you during this time?
Yeah, because it's funny because we are just like two dudes, like genuinely just having a conversation. And so I think it's good and a sign for whenever we're able to kind of tell ourselves whenever we're just having a conversation, if it kind of surprises us that, oh wait, people outside of this listen, like it's crazy. And so kind of some things, off the top that it's there are just some fun stories I want to bring up. First one, I guess just kind of the first trip we had for the podcast up to Tulsa.
Oh, yeah.
In June of last year. And that was right after I got back from Costa Rica. And being able to go up there, record with Yvonne, for me, being able to meet Yvonne, because you've known Yvonne for a number of years now. But being able to go up there, him and his wife, Shelby, being gracious and hosting us, letting us, crash in their living room, crash on their couch.
Good times.
And really just being able to dive into that first conversation about culture, like intentionally, and learning about, the Ivory Coast and, what it's like there. And also being able to enjoy, I think it was on the way back, Andolini's.
Yeah.
If I remember correct.
Yeah, that was good.
That pepperoni jalapeno pizza, that was great. And then even just, I can't remember if you did the Indian food we had with them.
That was great.
You do?
I love
okay.
Indian food, yeah.
I couldn't remember because I love Indian food, and that hit the spot. And then what is the gathering place?
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the gathering place, in Tulsa.
It feels like you're basically in Cali. There? Yeah, dude.
Oh, it was you. I couldn't remember who we were with. Okay, it was you, yeah.
Yeah, because it felt like we were in Cali.
It did.
With the beach, just the river right there's everything. Yeah. So just that whole trip was a lot of fun, being able to take in all of that and just being like, oh, wait, I think we got something here. Yeah. Was super cool. Another one is our 3 podcasts in one night special.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
With those boys, Jake and Jared.
Yeah.
And just as well that freaking clock at my parents' house.
Yeah. Was it going off every hour or something like that?
I think it was every 15 minutes.
Every 15 minutes? Yeah,
legit.
That was interesting.
And so it's tough to record whenever you got that going on in the background. Kind of similar to how we have this door alarm going on right here.
Edit it out. Yeah.
And so, and then I guess kind of transitioning from there, kind of the next thing, which I don't really know if this is like a memory or a moment or something like that, or just more of a blessing, but just in general, like being able to record at the office rather than at our houses.
Yeah.
And Carl and Rin and everyone at Capital Asset offering up the office to be able to do that. And so if y'all are listening, shout out to y'all.
Yeah, shout out to you guys. Because I feel like a lot of people don't know that we record at the office. And so I'm like, hey, come over to the office. Like, you guys have an office? I'm like, kind of. Not really, but yeah.
Yeah. And so it's it's definitely a big blessing to be able to have that. And so what's next ones for you?
Oh man, I think about the conversations we had in regards to just I mean, we won't get into the culture stuff later, but just learning about different nations from all the different guests that we have on, from Norway to Congo to Colombia to Australia to Brazil. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones.
I mean, Ivory Coast,
Thailand. These are just off the top of my head, but just kind of hearing people's experiences from being in those places, I think that's awesome because that's not an everyday thing. Because usually, whenever you're talking to your friends, you're talking about other things, right? I think I wrote this down. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down, but just the thought of whenever you invite your friend on, whether it's your friend or my friend or whomever, they come on, and then they share something, and you're like, I didn't even know that about you, right? Those type of moments always stood out to me, whether it's, anybody really that I knew pretty well. And they came on to share something, and I was like, oh, wow. I didn't know. So it really gives you a great opportunity to learn more, even more about your friends.
Yeah, I love it because I kind of have the same thing here for our podcast with Jordan Hornbuckle.
Yeah.
Because I've known Jordan for probably 12 or so years at this point, ever since just a little bit before high school. And me and him, after high school, we talked every now and then, just that kind of stuff, but didn't really reconnect until the UR fashion show back in January. And then we had him on. And so being able to hear a little bit more in depth about kind of what his high school experience was, what's gone on with him kind of since high school, and everything that God's done with that was definitely really, really cool.
Yeah.
And so kind of the next thing for me, since I kind of brought it up, being able to record with Montel, that was kind of him and Kirby being the first two, if you want to call them social media influencers.
I think that's the proper term.
Yeah, or artists or things like that, that we were able to record with was really, really cool. And then from there, just even how we were able to record with Montel, meeting him at his worship night in September of 2019. And us knowing his music before then, but that was whenever met him. And then from there in January, only a few months later, him flying down to record with us, staying at the house, and him recording with Kirby as well. And then all of us going to the UR fashion show was so much fun. And being able to pick his brain a little bit about creativity.
Yeah.
And just be able to see someone who's young and a young creative. It's so cool to be able to talk about those things with him and be able to, since he's still, relatively indie or whatever you want to call it, not too well known, and he's growing, being able to expose our listeners to him and just get to know him was really, really cool. And then I guess kind of going with the social media influencer theme, being able to go out to Atlanta and Nashville as well, to be able to record with Tony Tillman and Tadashi, the boys out there. Was a lot of fun because, we kind of started off the guests with traveling with Tulsa, things like that. And, since Tulsa, all the rest of them were kind of around here, something like that, until, we went out to Nashville and Atlanta, recorded with them. And whenever you went down to Brazil as well to record with all your people down there. Yeah. So you have anything about Brazil you want to add?
Oof. I mean, it was so cool just being able to have Zach, Neftali, and then Isaac on, just back to back to back, and kind of just how that opportunity opened. I mean, they're my friends when I say opportunity, just in the sense of our schedules being able to work together to where we could, make that happen. I flew down there. I had my mic, put it in my bag. I flew down there, had my laptop, brought it out. We recorded, had a good time, and and a lot of people really enjoyed those episodes. So I mean, that was just such a blast to be able to have great friends like that are doing crazy things, for the kingdom, being able to have them on the podcast, for them to share more about just what God is doing in their life, their testimony, and just the way that they're impacting the world where they are, just world changers. So,
and on top of that, being able to record in the environment as well, in the podcast, you heard different things going on in the background, and it was cool because it felt like we're actually there.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where you try to have a controlled environment, but like you said, I mean, we try to be as raw as we can.
Yep.
I'm sure you guys probably heard the airplane go over a couple of times, and that's cool. This is what we do. But yeah, I mean, those moments are just super exciting.
Yeah. And I'll say one last thing, because I don't know if it's the best joke you've had on the podcast.
Ooh, which one?
I'll say it's the one that I'll say I cracked up at the most.
Yeah.
Was with Jordan Madden, the Kangaroos.
Oh, the Kangaroos one.
Like, cause he was just like, bro, it came out of nowhere.
It really did. But I wouldn't even say that's my best work. I try to be very professional, as you guys can tell. Probably not. But that one, I was just like, okay, this is gonna go really well. It's gonna go very terribly. But he smiled and he answered, so I was really grateful. Shout out to Jordan.
Great dude.
Yeah, great dude. Ooh, you guys probably don't know about this, but we don't really have any blooper reels, but our pre-recording conversations are some of the best conversations, because we try to go over what we're going to talk about and getting to know different people, whether it's Chase bringing somebody or me bringing somebody. Shout out to my boy Reward. He gave us some of the best relationship advice in the 21st century, but we weren't able to get that on the podcast for you guys. But some of the podcast conversations are just amazing.
Exactly. And I'm going to follow up on that here in a little bit, because I have very much a related thought. So any other moments, memories you want to share?
I think we can, we can move on from there.
But so the next thing we're planning on talking about is just kind of the lessons, the wisdom we've kind of learned related to specifically like podcasting, conversations, creativity, kind of in that realm of things. One of the things I'll say to kind of start it off is because I want to mention some things, I guess, about the business side of things in terms of, this podcast being a part of a registered nonprofit, being a part of a nonprofit business.
Right.
And it's something where in terms of podcasts, I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about, what it was like kind of from a business investment kind of side, and let their listeners kind of like behind the curtains on things. And so I kind of want to share a couple thoughts related to that. For us, I would say one encouragement we give y'all is needing to find, if you want to start up an creative endeavor, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a blog, YouTube channel, whatever, I would say you would need to find the balance between just starting it, like just do it, and embracing not being a perfectionist, as well as starting it really just whenever it gets to the point of providing value for people, which I'll talk about value a little bit more here in a little bit. But I think it's something to where so many people can either be on one side of that spectrum where it's like, oh, I don't really want to release this yet because it's not where I want it to be yet, which I know Andy Minio's talked about a good amount in terms of his creative process. But then as well, you have some people out there who just kind of start and people get a bad first impression of it. And so from there, it can ruin some of the novelty to it. And so from there, kind of some of the things kind of related to our story and us starting this up of like kind of how we balance things was, it took us, what would you say, 3 to 5 months?
Yeah, probably.
From whenever we recorded the first podcast, and even when we recorded the first podcast, that was in April of 2019. So we had been talking about it for 4 months at least at that point, because we had that first meeting at Torchy's.
Yeah, shout out to Torchy's.
And saw that dude, Brad Gam.
Yeah.
Shout out Brad Gam. And so even from that, we allowed the vision of this podcast to be able to kind of flesh itself out and grow and things like that, and didn't rush it.
Right.
But still, even from there, with that first podcast, like, we didn't have mics. Oof. We recorded at my house with the dogs in the back.
Yeah.
And in a small little room, just all this stuff. And so even from there, like, the quality wasn't too good, but we knew we had the general idea of what we wanted to do through like the refining of that vision a little bit. And so kind of from there, I would say, like, even whenever you're starting things, like the incremental nature of how things are going to come along. And so, for example, like for us, kind of, as I said, recording the first 4 episodes over the course of 4 months. Yeah. Not even like 4 weeks, 4 months. And so from there, we built up to being able to record, on a weekly basis or a consistent basis, things like that. And from there, the first podcast, like, we didn't have mics. Right. And, eventually, we eventually got mics and it was okay. And then from there, whenever we were releasing these podcasts, like they were going on Apple Music, or excuse me, Apple Podcasts, but they weren't going on Spotify.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like, why isn't this happening?
Yeah,
and so
literally.
then I called our RSS feed, our podcast host service. They're like, oh, well, you need to do this. And so then like incrementally, like being able to finally get on Spotify so people could listen. And then from there, like the intro music, it was whenever we started, it was just raw conversations, which is what we wanted.
Yeah.
And from there, being able to add the intro music to it, that shout out Kirby as well. She was the one who encouraged that.
Yeah.
Added that little bit of extra professional part. And then from there, the guests, the length, the various topics that we wanted to discuss, like these things incrementally add on. And I'll say all that to say, just make use of what's available to you and just grow from there.
Right.
You don't have to have everything figured out to start, because like we sure didn't, but honor the Lord and your guest by putting genuine thought and work into the vision of it and why you're creating in the first place and things like that.
Right.
I know Jasmine Tate talks a lot about the purpose behind creativity,
right,
and the ruach of God and things like that. And so just we so often, I'll kind of talk about this again here in a little bit, but we so often think that creativity is this some kind of like flowery, fun thing, and never really think about the responsible side of creativity and the responsibility that comes with that gift. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to share those things because I know, other podcasts have shared just kind of like their stories of starting up,
right,
but not really giving too much like practical advice of like what was, the incremental things. And we've had a lot of people ask over this time of like, hey, we're thinking about starting up a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, how'd you do it? And so sending it out. So kind of putting that little part on record.
Yeah. And it's even on, podcasting and being creative and conversations, all these different things. As you were speaking, a verse that came to mind was better is the end of the thing than the beginning. I believe that's how it goes, right? Like you said, there's this increase that comes as time goes, as you continue to be faithful in what you feel like the Lord's put in your heart, right? The end of it is always better than the beginning, because the beginning you're like, man, no one's going to listen, nobody cares, this, that, and the other. And for me, even on a personal level, I feel like there's an art to this thing in terms of conversation and all that. Sometimes I feel like when I talk and I'm thinking about a word and I start stumbling like I just did right there, stumbling over words or I'm not pronouncing it correctly. So I hope you guys forgive me. English isn't my first language. So I stumble over words at times, but that's because a lot of times we'll give our guests, like a breakdown of what we want to discuss. But some of the questions that we come up with are usually just on the spot. So what I've learned during this time is how to come up with questions on the spot. Because you guys are not here, so sometimes Chase and I will look at each other like, oh, you gonna go? I'm gonna go. You're gonna go? I'm gonna go. Figuring out that balance of when do I speak? When does he speak? When do I let him ask a follow-up question and kind of hold on to the question that I had? Try your best not to forget it. Sometimes, we're on our phones. It's not because we're like texting or whatever, but like, hey, say this. Hey, bring this up. We kind of do different things like that just so, we're making sure that we're covering a variety of different things. So really just learning what it looks like to be. So what are we called, people that do podcasts? Is there like a term for that? I don't know.
Podcasters.
Podcasters. We are silly podcasters. I'm not a social media influencer, but I'm a podcaster, if that makes sense. Somebody correct me if I got it wrong. But really just learning how to have conversations with people. Yeah. And especially, like I said, coming up with questions on the spot, really goes a long way. And sometimes you just throw your script away and kind of just go off of what the guest is giving you, and really just learning that to where, if your guest is talking about how the sky is red, I'm not going to switch and start talking about 2 + 2 because I'm interested to know why he thinks the sky is red. Yeah. Right? So being able to navigate conversations based off of the responses that you're getting. So I think that part has been really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it's key for us to learn because we format these conversations uniquely, or typically it's between 3 people rather than just 2.
Right.
And that adds that extra layer of complexity and nuance to it that we need to build the skills for. And I would say even through this year, listening from like episode 1 to this last panel series that we just wrapped up with, I think even from there, the flow of conversation has been able to really improve. and we've been able to grow. And a verse that I want to add on to the verse that you just added, because I love this so much. Zechariah 4:10. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand, something like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man. And it's just like, it's funny because I was going to bring this up just in terms of improvement, figuring out how to curate conversations, when to let guests go, when to go with it, when to stay with our rundown. Like, the whole concept of 10,000 hours to master a task. Like, I'll just say, like, I think that whole thing is pretty spot on and pretty real. I know Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in his book Outliers that I brought up last podcast as a resource, but he talks about that a little bit in that book as well. One guy that I listened to in his podcast a good amount, Bill Simmons, sports podcaster, for those of y'all who might not be sports people. He's talked about his, podcasting and YouTubing and everything like that over the course of, however so long. And he's been podcasting, I want to say, for almost 15 years, something like that now. But it took him really 2 years to kind of get comfortable podcasting.
Right.
And that wasn't even with, curating a conversation for, 3 people. And there's just so much into curating it, and so much that by not going with certain different things, it can turn the conversation so much into a Q&A rather than a free-flowing conversation of which we want something kind of similar to like a Joe Rogan kind of thing, to where, he has those things that he wants to go with, but he's willing to go off and discuss, nutrition or aliens, weird things like that.
Right.
And so, like, you have to balance all these things, while you're hosting a conversation, like getting off your perspective and your takes, selling the other person, accentuating what they're saying, pushing them in the flow of the conversation to kind of move forward rather than just stagnating, and as well, just not overpowering them.
Right.
And so, like, these conversational reps, which I never thought I would ever say, are so key to just grow.
Yeah.
And we're grateful that, there's been a number of podcasts that, and conversations we've had with people that we haven't aired that I think has really allowed us to grow. But also just practicing the art of conversation in real life as well. So,
yeah. I mean, even to that point, I feel like for me personally, like, I'll listen to a lot of sports stuff and sports debates, different just people that I know that are sports people, and they have podcasts, and I'll listen to them and just kind of see how, not because I want to sit there and learn, right? I just enjoy what they're talking about. And as a result, you kind of pick up on things. And so whenever you come on here, trying to put your own spin on those things that you thought was good. And the last thing that I would bring up is water, or something to drink. That's so important. Yeah. Like, you guys already said, we always like, Chase is like, you got your water? I'm like, yeah, okay, we're ready to go, right? Because that's part of what we do, right? Because you got to be able to drink water, and so your voice doesn't crack up or whatever. I don't know if that's a tip or just something random.
No, it's good.
Yeah,
so good.
And yeah, I mean, what were some of the last things, I guess I should say, that you learned in regards to this?
Yeah, I think I'll share. There's a few. I guess I just won't go into any of these too much. We don't need a monologue like what happened last night a couple times, like last episode a couple times. So I'll say the first thing is consistency. Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this a lot, just in terms of creativity, especially podcast. Is consistency is so important, not just from the standpoint of developing skills, but also from the standpoint of just the friends you have in life, the people who are supporting you, and the people who could be listening to you, taking you seriously. Because I think we've all had those friends who start a new creative endeavor, and they kind of do it for a few episodes or a few things, and we're just kind of like, all right, like, I guess this is a new hobby or something like that they have. And we don't really take it seriously and start to, in a way, support them until, a while into it. And I think, for example, like Joe Rogan, he was podcasting for, I think, 4 years before he like really started to go off and things like that. And there's been a number of times where it kind of, the first 4 or so months, with us being, two average or above average dudes, whatever you want to say, basically people who aren't social media influencers, who don't have a following or whatever. Starting out something like this, like, we're not expecting there to be crazy streams, and we're fine with that because that's not our motivation behind it. And so even from there, like 3-4 months into it, streams were kind of low. We're like, that's fine and expected. After that point, as we saw, like, streams started to pick up, but then as well in outside conversations with friends, they started to be like, hey, I listened to the podcast and, I actually really like it. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And it happens more and more frequently, like, as we've continued to be consistent of just have like gone on. And so, like, consistency really shows something to people who want to be behind you, who want to support you. Because there are those people who, immediately are down to share it, like whenever you're starting something, those initial supporters, which are great. But you also have to take into account, like, just people's psychology of just like, I'm not sure if this person's committed to this yet, so I'm not sure if I'm going to commit my time.
Yeah,
things like that.
That's true. That's true. It's a good point.
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing for me is, like, I've definitely seen again through this how tough it is to balance a creative endeavor with the business side of things, especially with perspectives. With us having our board and having leadership and people we need to answer to in a way of things that we're doing and get their approval, as well as balancing the, like, finance side, the accounting side, project side, all of that, as well with us being a nonprofit, the actual charity side of things.
Right.
It's very difficult to balance all of that. At least for me, and I think a lot of people can relate, because, like, at least for me, whenever you're in business mode, your brain is kind of in one way, where it's kind of like analytical. It's like very much in carved paths or whatever you want to say. Whereas whenever I'm doing something creative, I need to have, like, a mind of openness, and just novel thoughts and new things come in, rather than just being rigid and structured in, like, business things. And so I've found it's kind of difficult to switch my brain consistently from one side to the other. And I think we see that across other sort of things, like communication. If we're used to communicating one way in a job, in a business, and then you come back home, you need to be intentional about switching the way you communicate to your wife versus, the people who report to you or who you report to. And so that's kind of been something that's interesting. Another thing I would say, which kind of goes towards the, again, perfect idea, which I'll just briefly say, for us, I think we've realized a podcast or a conversation doesn't have to be perfect for us to release it. Pastor Robert, for those of y'all who go to Gateway, talked about this a little bit today, so I'd recommend to go check out his sermon from this weekend. But basically, it doesn't have to be perfect. I would encourage you. It just needs to be something that honors God by being the best work that you could do. And pursuing excellence, which is pure, like, definitely a biblical thing. Another thing is inspiration is valuable. I think I underestimated this truth for probably the first 6 or 8 months of the podcast. I was very much just like, hey, how much, practical wisdom can people get? What new ideas can people get? What new perspectives can people get? Rather than bringing on very inspirational people to just inspire people to live better, pursue God better, be more obedient, everything like that. And because kind of why I'm saying value things like that, like, a creative product needs to be valuable, or else there's almost no reason you should put it out. Like, God wants us to create and things like that. But if you create without there being some sort of value, it's almost just like idle or meaningless. And there almost just might be, I would think that's a sign from the Lord that there's something else that you should be looking into and pursuing. And so, again, this value can come from many ways: practical wisdom, ideas, perspectives, other things of value that you receive from our podcast or other podcasts, but one of them is inspiration. And I didn't think that was like a tangible thing of value, but then again, maybe value doesn't have to be something that's tangible. And I think that's perfectly fine. And so that's something that I'm hoping we could dive into a little bit more over this next year, is pursuing just kind of inspiration and inspiring people whether it's inspiring them to travel now that we can kind of travel again.
Yeah.
Inspiring them to boldness, inspiring them to humility, inspiring them to servanthood, things like that. I think it's so good.
Yeah.
3 more quick things, very quick things. 1, it's okay to let people be wrong. Kind of talked about this in the last podcast. Joe Rogan does a great job at this. If you want to look more into that, go listen to the last episode. Encouragement is so good and encouraging whenever you're pursuing something, whenever you're on this journey. And kind of as Josue already said, like all the friends, like everyone who's reached out over the last year that have said they love the podcast, listen to it every week, or, oh, this was your best episode yet. Like it's great for us as we're going through this. And, whenever people share it, obviously that's great too, but it's, I don't want to say I underestimated that whenever it comes to creativity, but it's reassuring because you're putting something out there that you don't really know what to do. And so many people who are creatives are kind of tempted to be like, I really do want to honor God and everything like that. And as well on the back end are just kind of like, I want people to kind of think this is good too.
Right.
And so it's really difficult for creatives, I think, to either fully embrace, like, I don't care what the heck people think. I'm just going to do this I'm just going to put this out to honor God, or like have a healthy view of like, I hope people appreciate this and find value. The last thing is, again, numbers do not really matter, nor subscribe value. They could signify the fruit that you're bearing by what you're doing, but they don't affect your worth to God, nor how devoted you actually are to God. And I think that's just been confirmed to us more and more and more. This podcast, I think, has been great for both of us over this last year. And relative to like other podcasts by other believers who are great and that are amazing people, maybe ours doesn't get as many streams, maybe ours gets more. Like, here's the thing, like the measure is your faithfulness to the Lord, not numbers or whatever the world says.
Yeah.
So I'll just say that. Do you have any last thoughts?
No, I mean, that's a great point. I remember I posted a video on Instagram. I think it was a video on Instagram once, and sometimes like you post a picture or whatever, and then you're trying to see what kind of responses you get from it. What do they call it? Engagement.
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing the kind of numbers that I thought I was going to get on that, and I remember I was kind of a little bit bummed by it, and I was like, man, I thought I was going to be able to get more on that. Not specifically just for the numbers, but because I thought it was something good. I wanted people to listen and all that fun stuff. And so I remember sitting on my bed, kind of thinking about it. I was a little like, man, I was expecting to get more. And that verse that I shared earlier came to mind about, better is the end and the beginning and all these different things. And I felt like the Lord really encouraged me through that verse. And what he ended up doing after was, I get on Instagram, still the numbers were the same. One of my friends messaged me and she was like, just encouraged me like, hey, I just want to let you know, I kind of see everything that you're doing just in life and whatever. And it's awesome. Just one of those kinds of messages. And I was like, wow, that was unexpected. Yeah. And then another friend, he said the exact same thing, right? And they were just from the most unexpected people. And I was like, wow. And so I sat there thinking about it like, man. So to Chase's point, obviously you want more people to listen and just all these things. You want to have that engagement, but just know in the midst of, you being faithful to that which you are doing, there are people that are listening to it that might have never said anything to you, but they're seeing the fruits of your labor and they're encouraged by everything you're doing. And in that, there is value in what you're doing. So just kind of that being an encouragement. But I know one thing that we also wanted to touch on was just what did you learn, about culture, missions, and travel and all that fun stuff, during this last year?
Yeah, I think one thing, which is something I've learned of, but I still haven't looked into, that I just wanted to talk about this off the top so people could look into this, is something called Hofstede's cultural dimensions. I haven't brought this up on the podcast before, but in this talk about culture, and I want to really learn more about culture, that's a passion of mine, is kind of looking at this cultural dimensions that this psychologist, sociologist kind of found in, I think it was through the 80s and the 90s. But essentially, there's a big textbook that's like $120. I'm eventually going to buy about this, but basically, his 5 dimensions across cultures where you can kind of measure how unique and how similar different cultures are is power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individual or collectivism, masculinity or femininity, and then long-term orientation. And so I just want to throw that out there because I don't know if we're going to bring that more into the podcast of how to analyze different cultures and bring people on from those cultures to kind of look into it. But I just wanted to add that. And then naturally from there, which is why I'm not sure how or if we're going to implement this into the podcast, is one of the things I've really, really seen over this last year is like people within people groups, whether it's races, ethnicities, sexes, language, like just because they're a part of the same ethnicity doesn't mean two people or that's a monolith. They all believe the same thing. They're uniform, and that two people think the same thing. Like people within those groups have such a wide ranging perspective. And I just love listening to people from their perspective, how their culture has influenced that, and then just growing mine from that. And I've said it a lot, especially recently, but the fact that like psychologists have seen that there's more differences between people groups than there's more differences of between people within people groups than between actual people groups. And so it's really unique, especially whenever we thought the exact opposite of that before that revelation happened in the psychological literature. But it's really interesting. What about you?
Man, I think so. We have missions. We want to go on missions, but with COVID and everything happening, we didn't really get the opportunity to be able to do that as much as we wanted to or would have loved to do. So being able to just sit back and think about everybody that spoke about their mission experience, over the last year or so, you could really take a lot from that and just see, wow, God is just moving in different ways in different places. And that's such a beautiful thing, right? Because we have such a limited scope of what's going on in the world, right? We have such a small view of everything going on in the world. And obviously God knows all things. He's working there and here and there and here and there. But we just kind of know what's going on our own, social media feed or whatever the situation might be. So just thinking about the last year and just everyone that has shared those mission experiences, I feel like really helped a lot to sit back and say, wow, God, you're still working, you're still moving, you're still doing a lot of great things. The gospel's being preached and is bearing much fruit, like it says in Colossians chapter 1. And so that part for me was just really exciting. And also thinking about culture and just their cultures are so different, but it's also beautiful, just seeing people, what makes people tick, what makes people think a certain way. Why do these group of people think this way? So just learning those type of things for me has been really exciting. Right, because I've always been that kind of person, coming from Congo and moving to America. A lot of my friends were, Laos and Hmong and Mexican whites and this and this and this and this and this. So really, just having that kind of friend group growing up, I've always just enjoyed and appreciated other people's cultures. So to be able to have a platform like this where we can discuss culture and learn from people's culture. For me, that's really been exciting. So, yeah.
And I'll say the last thing I'd like to add to this related to your thought about Corona, not being able to travel, basically, I think the Lord through that really affirmed our intention of being involved both internationally and locally in terms of outreach, in terms of serving, in terms of monetary or time investment. It's been something, especially through the Fort Worth outreaches, the work with West End Church down in Dallas, everything like that. Like, I think it's been great that this time has allowed us to be more intentional about that. Because, for example, if this wouldn't have happened and we would have been able to travel, like the trips that got canceled because of this, like Norway, Costa Rica, Mexico, Guatemala, and then either Ivory Coast, Thailand, or France. And so that would have been a lot of traveling, especially from March until August, beginning of August or so. And so one of the things I saw from last year was, whenever a whole bunch of travel is like that back to back to back, which kind of happened last year with, China and then Costa Rica and then the Alps, kind of for me and other family trips, in between. It was something where I felt like I almost lost touch locally a little bit. And so then from there, being able to stay home completely from end of August until end of the year
Right.
really allowed me to just reconnect and build new relationships. And so that's something that I think definitely through this just whole experience over the last year has been something that's been great.
Yeah.
And so kind of moving from there, personal and spiritual lessons that you've learned over the last year here on the podcast.
Yeah. Spiritual lessons. It's like I think I probably mentioned a little bit, from my previous comments, but seeing and understanding how God works, obviously no one's going to ever grasp all of it, but I think what the podcast did for me, it helped me to broaden my horizon much more how God works and speaks to people, right? Because I might feel like God speaks to me in this way, whereas to someone else, he might speak to them in another way. So on a spiritual level, just when you hear stories and you say, okay, why'd you do this? Okay, why'd you respond that way? Having those type of conversations, I felt like for me, helped me to see, oh wow, God speaks to different people differently, right? We all don't think the same like you mentioned earlier. So it's cool because one thing that I've always said, because I believe it with everything that I have, God knows every person, and we all know that, but he knows every person intimately.
Yeah.
And he relates to them intimately, right? And so through this, on a personal level, I felt like it really gave me a picture for that, to be able to see how God has related to this person, especially when you hear people's testimonies and you kind of hear at the moment where they came to a place where they're like, oh, wow, Jesus, I gave you my life type of deal, right?
Yeah.
And seeing like, man, that was different than how it happened for me, right? Or just hearing people's moments of faithfulness and obedience and how God spoke to them. And you're thinking to yourself, man, that's way different than how it happened for me. So I really think about those type of things and how that really helped me to broaden, for me. I feel like a word that I receive for myself every year at the beginning of the year, I always pray, okay, God, give me one word, just one. And I feel like this year the word was the knowledge of God, right? In the sense of knowing him more. And so, even through the podcast, right? My knowing of God has increased because of all the different great guests that we had on that have shared and just testified of God's goodness and testified of his character and all these different things. So
yeah, I think the first thing for me, and it kind of relates to the last segment as well, is just continued affirmation of our culture's thought that we have with perspectives, which for those of y'all who haven't heard it yet, not sure how many of y'all out there haven't, but basically we have this thought about culture that the Father's placed a unique part of his character into these different parts of all these different cultures that are around. And that one of the ways we can grow to know the Father's character and what he values and who he is through engaging these other cultures, finding these uniquenesses in them. And some of the examples I always bring up is with European culture, like their appreciation of beauty, with art, architecture, their investment in it, everything like that. With African cultures, I would say, and you can probably add a little bit more to this, but their respect and admiration for authority and parents in a way. And then as well, just simple, I guess dignity for people could be a good way to phrase it. For example, like you have to greet everyone whenever you're in the room thing.
Yeah.
So showing that everyone matters.
Right.
Latin cultures, the pace of life, them being a little bit slower, being able to rest a little bit easier than us here in America. Us here in America, our work ethic, something sometimes we take a little bit too far. Some people have a very good balance on it. And I think that's something that honors God. And so we see all of these different ways that these cultures are unique. And so one of the ways to grow our perspective is through engaging these cultures. And one of the ways we're able to know the Father is engaging these different cultures. And I think what we've seen through talking with various people, Yvonne, Stephania, Jordan, Piniel, and Matthias, and
Maria.
too many to name.
Yeah.
is that thought is true. And it's something that in hearing about these different cultures and getting to know the Father's character a little bit more, I've been able to see, like, in the times over the past year where I've become apathetic or I feel like I've drifted away from the Father a little bit, like, these podcasts are one of the things that he uses to speak to me, to remind me about different things, to remind me, hey, check your pride and be humble. And hey, I'm here to care for you. And you don't have to keep striving and everything like that. And so that's one of the big things for me.
Yeah.
What's the next thing?
Oh man, I feel like we've had a lot of as believers, obviously, people have come here and really shared a lot of great what do we usually say?
Last thoughts.
Yeah, last thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, those have really I'm relating that back to, the question at hand, but those last thoughts have really, because some people have really started preaching on their last thoughts, right? And all of those have really just gone towards helping our faith. They might say something like, oh, wow, that's really interesting, right? Those type of moments have really, I don't know if you guys, because sometimes like I'll really commend certain people for just the things that they say on here, the conversations that we have. That's because as they're talking, I'm learning and I'm thinking, I'm like, whoa, I'm being encouraged, I'm being strengthened and challenged and all these different things. So I think about those moments. And so on a personal level, those last minute thoughts that people share with the audience, share with us, share with everybody, have really gone a long way in helping me out, right? Because I also want to be encouraged. I want to be strengthened and all those great things. So that's just another thing that came to mind.
Yeah. I'll say one of the other things, I have a lot of thoughts just about friendships and just in relation to our guests. One of the things is, for me, just how important it simply is just to catch up with people and just genuinely ask how they're doing. I think for me, like, I tend to get super busy or like during this pandemic, like I tend to not reach out to people or text people and things like that. And I think others can relate like in that as well. And so for me, like, these friendships are like just so key in life, or I should say just friendships in general. Like, God wants us and has a heart for us to be in community, as is almost a cliche now in the church, but it's so true. And so for me, like, one of the things that I've seen through this podcast is, like, I've in a way used this podcast to catch up with friends. Like, this is something that I've used the podcast for, like, both like when we're recording and as you said, for the conversations before we start recording each time, just asking people and using it as an opportunity how they're doing and everything like that. And ironically, it is similar in a way to kind of how Joe Rogan uses his podcast. For him, both, I'm sure beforehand, but as he's recording, like, to just sit down with his friend or the guest, to shut the world out, to just catch up and talk with the person about something interesting, something that Joe's interested in, and get their thoughts on it. And it's something that I've seen, like, when I'm recording, like, that is, I don't know if I would say it's the only time, but it's one of the main times where I'm able to just shut the world out and shut out all the busyness and all the work that I have to get to and just be with people and connect with people.
Right.
And I've been able to really, really enjoy that. And just how through these conversations, through this creative process, like, how quickly and deeply, like, friendships grow, even new friendships can grow through just simply doing a podcast or just something creative like this. For example, like Ermias, first time I ever actually saw him in person was at your birthday a month or so ago, probably. And immediately when I saw him, I was like, that dude, what up? And I'd never seen him in person before. And I was just like, there's instantly a bond there. Right. And it's crazy. Like, it has to be something related to the podcast. I don't know why. And so I think there's just something about creating something together that just creates this special bond. And so it's super interesting. Those were just kind of a couple thoughts I had about friendships.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely.
Yeah.
I agree completely. So.
I think, do you have anything you want to add? Cool.
No.
I have two thoughts. One, I've seen me use these podcasts as a form of journaling in a way, to be vulnerable with people. I've had a history of occasionally being not even occasionally. I've had a history of being legalistic whenever it comes to journaling, where I use it as sort of like a memory pad because my memory is rough, whether that's because of football, whether that's lacrosse, whether it's just Chase being Chase. I don't know. But, and so I've used it as a way to kind of like write down my life so I could go reflect on things. And, I would get behind and then I'd be like, Chase, you idiot, what are you doing? And then spend a whole bunch of time catching up. And so there's been this cycle of like, finally I'm caught up on journaling. Oh, I'm 3 months behind again and everything like that. And so through me, like I've been able to see, and I can grow in this to be able to continue to embrace this as a way for me to like note my thoughts down in something, not necessarily on paper, but in a conversation, and come back and have it on record for me to be able to come back to,
right?
To just think, what was I thinking during that time? Because I really admire people like Pastor Robert and others who are just able to be like, oh, whenever I was, 25 years old, I had this thought and this experience and stuff like that. And I'm like, I feel like I can never pull those kind of things up.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so it's really interesting. I would say the last thing is I'm very, very grateful and overwhelmed for the growth that we've had. Just to share with y'all, we've had anywhere from 40 to 60% growth each of the past 5 months. And it's just amazing to see that.
Yeah.
And it's encouraging for us. But kind of something that's kind of related to that is, as the numbers, as the streams, as more of y'all are starting to listen, like obviously eyes and things like come with that. And there's a heaviness or a weightiness, I should say, to our words. And so being able to be cautious and not too flippant with our words, but at the same time, being able to be free and only needing the Lord's approval is something that's key, and being courageous with different things. But kind of related to that, something I've seen is like, I just don't want to be a social media influencer ever. Like I love having these conversations. I really enjoy them. As we kind of talked about before the podcast, and every now and then over the last year, like this kind of stuff can be exhausting. Being able to constantly come out with new conversations, new content, new ideas, things like that. As well, just the simple fact of coming to the office, recording them, editing them, uploading them, promoting them is a process. And as well, I kind of think almost all worthy work can be exhausting in a way, whether it's mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, but yeah, I just kind of want to say that to say, like, I do not want to have all of these eyes on me, especially with how much of a lack of grace is shown to people who have platforms. And, I don't want those temptations that, being an influencer brings and things like that. Like, I just want to have these fun conversations with friends, allow people to listen to those, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, dude, I think just kind of wrap up that section. Like, we just have so many dope and interesting friends.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Just like, people are so dang interesting. If we would just like sit down, be intentional, ask the right questions, develop that rapport, that trust with them. Like, it's crazy.
No, that's true.
Yeah. And so kind of wrap things up here. Kind of one of the main things we want to say is like, we're just really excited for this next year. As great as things were for the last year, we're expectant of everything to come with this next year. And, everything that we have planned, all the exciting guests, all the friends that are going to be joining us, hopefully some continued great ideas that we're going to be able to share, to encourage or provoke some new thought, some not new age thought, just new thought. But just be able to inspire y'all, provide some wisdom, get y'all introduced to some new people, some cool people, have some returning guests, different things like that. But yeah, man, have any, as you said, ending thoughts?
Anything? No, man, it's been fun. The year has been fun. And once again, thank you to all of our guests that have come on and you shared so much. And thank you to everyone that's listened. And I honestly don't know how growth happens. I mean, I get it, but I don't know, like 60% growth over the last couple of months continuously. That's just crazy to me, right? Because to me, in my mind, like I always say, we're just a small podcast, right? Yeah. I don't know if that's like my false humility type of deal or what the situation is. But yeah, just thank you guys. I hope you enjoy just these average guys having these conversations with amazing people. You know, and we hope to be able to continue to do that, to bring more interesting people, just talk about their life. You know, I mean, I feel like this is our culture, just learning more about people and learning about culture, seeing God in the midst of all these different things. So I'm excited. You know, that's 50. Who knew we were going to get here? I still remember recording episode 1. We were all right next to each other because we had to speak next to the speaker on the computer. But now here we are. You know, praise God for that.
Just a boy from Texas and just a boy from the Congo.
That's all I am, just a boy from the Congo.
It's crazy, man. And I'm definitely excited. I think I speak for both of us. We're excited to continue to bring y'all value. Continue to bring our guests value for being able to give them opportunity to participate in these kind of conversations. And so kind of a little sneak peek for the next episode 51. We're going to be doing a sort of, I guess you could call it reintroduction to perspectives. You know, we haven't really given any sort of full update on the nonprofit since our first episode a year ago. Yeah. And so we thought it'd be fitting to just kind of do that and discuss, you know, how our vision has evolved over the last year. You know, what we're thinking of being involved in and doing over this next year. What are some things we're doing right now? And what are some ways that y'all could get involved? And so, you know, we love it. And so, will that be a wrap for us?
That's it for us.
Yeah. So, again, as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. If you would like to support the podcast, all of our information will be included in the description below. Our website will be there so you can make a donation to support the podcast, support the outreaches, everything like that. As well, the information for me and Josue are going to be down there. If you want to follow us on social media or send us a message, send us an email, anything like that. But yeah, and so if that's it, you know, until next time, much love and God bless.